In September of 2014, a decision was made by the National People's Congress Standing Committee, or NPCSC, to disallow universal suffrage for the upcoming 2017 Hong Kong chief executive election. In the partly capitalist region, the result was chaos. From September to December 2014, a tranquil Hong Kong was transformed into a restless city in despair. In those 3 months, over 470 injuries occurred and over 900 were apprehended for speaking against the government.
Hong Kong, a special administrative region, was partially democratic, but was also influenced of the Communist Party during 2014. Previously, in 2007, Hong Kong was promised popular vote for the 2017 Hong Kong chief executive election. Hong Kong was always less influenced by democracy than communism, since China regained it in July 1997. Political activists in Hong Kong always sought a more democratic political system for their country, something that still happens to this day. However, the Communist Party would once again have a decision in their favor. On August 31, 2014, the NPCSC officially repealed the 2007 decision by disallowing universal suffrage for the 2017 elections. This would be the spark of what would be a peaceless time period. After approximately 3 weeks of stalling tensions, pro-democratic students bursted them on September 22nd by rioting on Hong Kong Island, initiating a democratic revolution.
This was somewhat of a civil war between the blue or anti-Occupy group versus the yellow or pro-Occupy group. People who belonged to the blue group were generally government officials and or citizens in favor of communism. People in the yellow group were protesters in search of democracy and equal universal voting rights. Soon after the students began their protests, the Occupy Central with Love and Peace organization officially claimed that they would be starting a civil disobedience movement. These groups combined to occupy the largest districts of Hong Kong, such as Admiralty, Central, Mong Kok, and Causeway Bay. Government officials were displeased with this democratic movement, and they denounced it because it was not in favor of the law.
For the Hong Kong government, the actions that unfolded were to be expected. The protesters were surrounded by numerous officers carrying shields, who would fissure the mass groups by throwing tear gas at them. The group, led by Joshua Wong, had to endure harsh waves of pepper spray, injuring several of the participating students. Taking place at around midnight near the Legislative Council, Joshua Wong, along with 12 other Asians, were arrested for charges against government property. The following day brought 78 more arrests from protesting students as the OCLP took notice of the events and rallied with the students. As the tension grew between the police and students increased, heavier measures of control was used to calm the crowd down. Shots of liquefied tear gas was shot at the protesters, harming both violent and peaceful students, causing a massive eruption from the onlooking citizens, who joined the students in what would become a revolt of over 100,000 people. By the 29th of September, a total of 89 arrests were made, and 41 deaths were recorded.
In October 2014, tensions continued to escalate. In Mong Kok, a major district of Hong Kong, a large group of protesters formed its own camp. Many Hong Kong citizens who could not stand any more protests attempted to disassemble the camp. The police were informed on this, and they decided to partake in breaking up the camp by prosecuting a handful of members of this camp. Later that month, controversy arose when a protester, who was a lawmaker, was beaten by members of the police force into critical condition. Talks continued into the government on how to handle the protests, but for this month, they were to no avail.
In November, government officials decided to attempt clearance movements of the protesters. The first stop was Admiralty. Since the protests lasted for approximately 2 months at that point, protesters gradually moved away from Admiralty without a great amount of argument. The government then tried to close off the camp at Mong Kok. However, the attempt fared much differently and was nowhere near as effective. This time, protesters led riots against the police force, and nearly no clearance occurred. The government's next move was to prevent any access to government offices through the use of powerful water hoses and batons, which proved to be successful.
On December 3, the 3 OCLP co-founders, Benny Tai, Chan Kin-man, and Chu Ying-ming, held a press conference stating that people in this group must discontinue their protests, for their own safety. Soon after, the three would confess to the government, asking for freedom under promise of less violent reforms. The three were released from prison without charge in less than a week. The government attempted a second Admiralty clearance on December 11, and protesters were completely moved out of the district by the 15th. A long 2.5-month period of civil unrest was over without any change in the voting rights. But this did not mark the end of the desire for democracy and universal suffrage in Hong Kong.